Welcome, everyone. This is Rob Waters, Program Director with State HIT Connect. We're very excited to get proceedings underway for today's Future Medicaid Day. This is now, I think, the third in the series. Today's sessions will focus on enterprise data and delivering person-centered care across health and human services. I do want to recognize, just as we roll in, to a little bit of housekeeping for today and a bit of direction for participants. Our supporting level sponsors, Bamboo Health and Optum, who help bring together today's conversations, as well as supporting our virtual programming as community sponsors as well. Just to segment over to the next slide, you'll see there just a quick framing for the day. And if you're planning out participation in sessions throughout this afternoon on the East Coast and on the West Coast, still in the morning, of course, you'll see the breakdown. So 12 to 1 is this morning's plenary, a conversation about Medicaid enterprise data management. And then we roll into two collaborative learning roundtables, 1:30 to 2:30 Eastern time, and then 3 to 4:30 this afternoon as well. Now, both of those are state non-vendor only collaborative learning roundtables. The first being the impact of Medicaid on behavioral health conditions, a very popular topic throughout our programming, and I'm certainly that will continue today. And then more of an emerging technologies conversation then around the perfect match, artificial intelligence and contact center. I do also want to just give you a quick save of dates. If you can move on to the next slide for our program upcoming on June 1st, which will be our Public Health Modernization Day. We have some tremendous sessions exploring, how states are coordinating stakeholders and prioritizing resources to meet the complexities of the public health modernization mission. Looking at issues around interoperability and scalability and, of course, sustainability for those critical public health services as well. Continuing some of the themes actually from our annual meeting at the plenary session in regards to the Helios group. So some really interesting updates there. That was something that we had a lot of very positive feedback and we'll be continuing that conversation accordingly. And some other very important sessions then later on in the day. We do still have the industry insights position available. So if there's a group that wants to send Victoria an email, her email is there if you're interested in potentially presenting that session, victorias@healthcareitconnect.com, and she can get you information on that. And then next slide, please. I'm just going to roll into some more details related to the presenters for the day. Again, if you're planning out your participation. Here are the details for the plenary. We're going to roll into some introductions for the presenters there momentarily, so I won't go into that in any more detail. The first of the roundtables, then afterwards, the impact of Medicaid on behavioral health conditions with Cara Slusser, Director of Inspect with the state of Indiana, Rebecca Taylor, Director of Research and Evaluation with Maine, joining them both, Vatsala Kapoor, Senior Director with Bamboo Health. And then the final session for the day, I'll be participating as the sort of co-moderator. And then we have two presenters from Arizona, Anthony Flott, who many of you know from our annual meeting, CTO now with Arizona Access, and then Claudia Rodriguez, who's more on the contact center operations side. So you'll have an opportunity to learn from those presenters later today. But coming back to this morning's plenary and wanting to get the conversation started as soon as possible. The moderator for today's plenary session is Brandon Greify. He's the Senior Director of Government Solutions with Innovisa. Innovisa are a new community sponsor with State HIT Connect. We're welcoming them on board, and joining Brandon will be Vicky Foreman, Enterprise Solutions the director for the Enterprise Solutions Integration Office with Colorado Medicaid, and Fiella Tony, Chief Portfolio Officer with Maryland Department of Health, and Jerry Britcher, Chief Information Officer, Washington State Healthcare Authority. So that's the plenary for this morning. Some very robust conversations in the run-up to today's plenary. So I think this will be a very engaging conversation and a lot of interest from community members around this conversation and different approaches. I do want to just do a little bit of housekeeping related to audience participation. There is a chat box, a chat window in your view and navigation there at the State Hit Connect Media Portal. You'll see some just housekeeping and some prompts there in the chat window. That's where you'll be placing your questions. So enter those questions early and often as they come to mind. We will queue those, and it'll be good for Brandon to see those early so he can integrate that into the Q&A segment, which will probably be in the last 10 to 15 minutes. So at that point, I'm going to say no more, and I'm going to pass this over to Brandon Greify, and he's going to get this morning's conversation started, and really, really excited to learn more from the three state representatives and to have this discussion. Welcome, Brandon.
Absolutely, and thanks, Rob. And good afternoon or good morning, as it may be, to everyone who's joined us today. And I want to thank you for attending this really important session on Medicaid enterprise data management. As Rob said, we've got three just really amazing speakers for today's presentation, each of which brings just a wealth of knowledge and lived experience on how to leverage things like people, process, and technology to enhance interoperability and achieve a state of data readiness to support data-driven decision-making. Rob gave some brief introductions of the panelists, but I did want to take the opportunity to go around the virtual table, have each of the presenters introduce themselves, their title, and just a little bit about their role. And Vicki, maybe I can start with you.
Thank you, and good morning, Brandon. My name is Vicki Foreman, and again, I am the Enterprise Solutions Integration Division Director for the state of Colorado. I presently reside in the Health Information Office at the Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing. I've been with the state for a little over 16 years and have played many roles within the department, mostly managing data from a claims perspective and managed care perspective, and have stepped into this role as the Solutions Integration Division Director to really oversee our integration and our data management. From looking at data over the last 16 years, we have learned a lot of lessons about managing data and making sure that our data model is intact. And we thought that having a solutions integration division within our agency was an important step to improve our enterprise, our Medicaid enterprise solution.
Excellent. Thanks, Vicki. Elle, we can go to you next.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Brandon. My name is Elle Toney. I am the Chief Portfolio Officer for the Maryland Department of Health. In my role, I oversee the enterprise technology portfolio for the number of agencies that report in through the Department of Health, and Medicaid being one of those administrations. Within the Medicaid portfolio, we have our major Medicaid modernization transformation program, which we currently have, I want to say about 20 plus projects and initiatives, and a rather large enterprise program management office that was currently managing those projects. And one of the main initiatives that we've been focusing on is around data, building out our data warehouse, a data lake, as well as putting in place a data management practice in order to support a higher ability for the department to leverage data for enhanced analytics and greater decision making. I started my career with the state and another agency more than a decade ago. I won't age myself. But I focused on claims in that capacity. So I have about 10 plus years of claims processing and investigations background until I moved into technology as a business analyst. and a trained enterprise architect, and then moved to the consulting private sector for some time before coming back to the state. When I came back to the state, I started as the director of Medicaid Enterprise Systems Development for the Department of Health, focusing on the Medicaid portfolio. And recently, over the last year, transitioned into my current role, overseeing the entire project portfolio for the Department of Health.
Excellent, thank you. And last but not least, Jerry, if you could introduce yourself.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jerry Britcher. I'm the Chief Information Officer for Washington State's Healthcare Authority. We are the state's Medicaid agency and behavioral health agency. And I have been with the state for 37 years. Don't mind dating myself a little bit. Had virtually every IT position you could think of. I've been a Chief Information Security Officer. I've been an enterprise architect, deputy CIO, CIO, all those kinds of fun things. I've been with technology in Washington State when we still had a very limited number of standalone computers in offices, and helped the state, or at least my agency, introduce all the major technologies that have evolved over those decades. Right now, our agency is going through a modernization effort with a number of large projects, very similar to the other states. Most notably, we are looking at standing up a state instance of an electronic health record solution. But we also have a number of other projects. Obviously, all states have a 988 implementation in some way, shape, or form. Washington State Proforma is doing a very expansive implementation, so it is rather complex, but I am involved in all of those things. I and my teams are involved in all of those things, and working with our sister agencies. Part of our governance structure around this is we actually have a coalition of health and human services agencies that includes our Department of Health, our Department of Social and Health Services, Department of Children, Youth, and Families, the Healthcare Authority, and our Health Benefit Exchange.
Excellent. Thanks, Jerry. And just again, a huge thanks to everyone on the panel for joining. I really think we're in for a great conversation. As Rob said, my name is Brandon Greifey, and I'm the Senior Director of Government Solutions here at Innovacer. And here I'm helping to position Innovacer's data ingestion, storage, and analytic capabilities to really help states like the ones on this panel move towards the goals of modularity. And while we're on that topic, modularity has really brought a tremendous change to the Medicaid enterprise, moving us from monolithic Medicaid management information system to a technology ecosystem that really ushers in opportunities for things like agility and innovation and new firms to participate. But perhaps most importantly, that shift towards modularity has also created more opportunities to put data at the center of the Medicaid program, enabling administrative efficiencies, allowing for a holistic outcome measurement, and really giving us a true whole person view of Medicaid policy effectiveness. It's also, empowered us to look outside the bounds of administrative claim data to a really rich fabric of data sources from previously siloed systems and programs. But achieving that goal sort of presumes a lot of hard work, namely that we're doing things like creating infrastructures to support data exchange, that we're leveraging technologies to ensure high quality data, and that we're creating processes to govern that exchange. And those things are really about what this conversation is, I hope that we can get across. So let's really just jump into the conversation, the ones who are actually tackling those challenges that we just mentioned, because they're the one who can tell you about their experience and give you some of the lessons they've learned along the way. So just first, a little bit of stage setting. Enterprise data management, which is the topic we're here to talk about. That's a description that can capture really a range of disciplines and technologies. So I'd like to have each of the panelists just briefly describe how their agency is defining data management, and then some of those current steps you're taking to support that strategic initiative. So maybe, Jerry, we'll start with you this time, if you don't mind.
Sure. So Washington State, we have set up governance processes and committees as part of those governance processes. But at its core, We define data management as the processes related to the acquisition, intake, storage, normalization, and standardization of data. So that's obviously a rather wide gamut, but it's obviously data is why we have IT systems. And so I'm sure you're familiar with the breadth of IT support that goes on, and data is even wider than those systems that we have, because obviously one of our challenges is to constrain how and where data flies. And I use that term because at least within my agency, we have 1,700 staff, and data can end up in all kinds of interesting locations. So, we have structured data, we have unstructured data, but ultimately our data management practices are around trying to provide the appropriate structure while allowing our business to accomplish their jobs and to support them in their jobs and their decision making.
Fantastic. Elle, maybe you could share a little bit of your experience and insight.
Absolutely. So very similar to Jerry, the Department of Health looks at data management in a very similar fashion in terms of the ingesting of the data, collecting, storing, maintaining, and then just really looking at the effective use of data, the effective and efficient use of that data. And our focus has really been on how to develop and define a true data management practice and discipline within our organization that is bigger than just the technology. I think, sometimes we look at, data management, we think about the tools, we go right to the tools, go right to the processes and, the technologies and the systems that do it. But MDH is really trying to take the approach of how do we change our cultural behavior around data and create a data management practice so that regardless of the technology, those processes, those principles are deep-seated within our organization so that from a technology perspective, we can truly reap the benefits of a true data management practice.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is a topic that certainly extends beyond technology. And Vicki, I think that you'd agree. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you're kind of looking at data management and how to achieve all of those various aims that Elle and Jerry have talked about?
Yes, Brandon. So our process is similar to Jerry's and Elle's processes. Colorado looks at defining data management as an all-inclusive entity, where we're looking at generating, collecting, storing, and using data in a secure, effective way based on our department and our state security protocols. We recently hired an enterprise solutions integrator, and as a part of their scope of work, we are depending upon them to come in and implement a data and integration governance structure for the Colorado Medicaid Enterprise Solution. This will allow us to be able to really share data with our sister agencies in a way that we haven't been able to do ever. And we think this is a game changer for us. And being able to set those standards up, we will be able to create a governance policy that we can push out and share not only with our sister agencies, but our system partners, our vendor partners, our HIEs, so that we are all following a defined process. Managing data is critical to the business that we do. And of course, if we don't align those processes up with our Medicaid policies and with our data model, of course, we all have experienced the outcome of that, members not receiving benefits. And so again, we look at data management as critical to our business and our business processes today.
Vicki, I just want to tease out one of the things that you just said, and I think it came across from all of the panelists, is this idea of creating standards, sort of this common language for building integrations and transmitting data. You mentioned the role of the SI, but can you walk us and our participants through some of the steps of creating that common language?
Yeah, so the most critical of all of that, the first thing that we needed to do was set up regular cadence of meetings and bringing every entity to the table to really talk about, what our end goals are. What are we trying to achieve in generating data and sharing data across not only the Medicaid platform, but with our partners? And we needed to really talk through, the definition of data, how we define data, what was the purpose of use of the data, who can receive the data. We needed to really talk about our distinct programs and the way that we wanted to transmit our data across the program. So discussing those formats and really talking through the definition of data, it led us to really then talk about the challenges that we face every day, and why it was so problematic in sharing data across the agencies. What we discovered in that exercise and talking through our challenges that we faced, we realized very early on, our vendor partners or even our agencies, they work in a silo. We were not quick to share any design developments in the work that we are currently doing. It was difficult to share the approach that we were taking to build interfaces and APIs. And it was really something that we had not focused on in previous years. We discovered through that exercise that there was very little collaboration. It wasn't a collaborative effort in really sharing information out. And getting everyone to the table, to really talk through and buy into the approach and to the new way of sharing and managing data was a challenge at first. And we really found that because of the lack of communication or the way that we communicated to each other, it also caused a barrier. But the moment that we got to the table and really started to talk and really started to understand that we had a common goal, and the common goal was to take the data that we were generating that was very similar in nature, that was being utilized for some of the same Medicaid members, some of the same Medicaid programs, we realized that we could really come together if we had a centerpiece, a common way of sharing the data, and come together to build those integrations and manage the data in a true formal way. We would then be able to build that partnership so that we could really share the data for future use.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And Elle, I think it touched on something that you mentioned earlier about, this is in some ways about changing cultural behavior internally as well. And so I'm curious if you had, as Vicki was speaking, if anything in particular resonated with you or how you've been able to kind of move the needle internally in changing that culture.
Absolutely. I'm kind of curious on whether or not Vicki was accidentally invited to our meetings. Seems like she was there, so I don't know if I should say anything at all. But we had the same kind of outcomes. We had a number of journey mapping sessions with our business teams, and from what Vicki said, the true was same for us. We recognize that a number of our business teams, if not all of them, were working in silos. And what MDH is trying to do is we look at Medicaid as a starting point, but at the same time, we want to take our wins from Medicaid and push them outward. And so what we're seeing, because MDH is I would say almost a conglomerate, a number of small businesses, right? Because we have all these different agencies with administrations within the group. We've got Medicaid, we've got DDA, we've got behavioral health, we've got PHS for public health. All of these different administrations operate almost autonomously, but they technically use the same types of data, and they're acting on behalf of the exact same population. It's all citizens, no matter what. It's all providers, no matter what. And so we're seeing that, Medicaid has their provided data, and public health has their provider data, and DDA has their provider data, and it's all provider data across the state, right? And so those were some of the conversations that we started having and started to say, like, well, who owns provider? I don't know. Do you? Does she? So really trying to understand, how do we look at data, not necessarily from these siloed administration views, but more from a larger population? How do we look at data domains at the aggregate? And yes, maybe Medicaid has their box of providers, but guess what? Those providers operate in a Medicaid space and a non-Medicaid space. So you're sharing the same individual. So how do we get to a space where we start to look at these individuals, these citizens who have, programs, who are, Medicaid recipients, but they're also getting, services from, MADAP, right? From age drugs. How do we do that? How do we look at these entities and individuals and data points in such a way that we're no longer siloed? And then the true goal is to be able to look at our citizen data, our population data collectively, holistically, in order to make better health policy decisions, to create better programs, to ultimately change health outcomes for the state. But we can't do that if Medicaid's just looking at Medicaid. And if kidney disease protection is only looking at kidney disease protection, and sickle cell is only looking at sickle cell. If we start to be able to share that data and be able to look at our programs and the people that we serve within those programs at that aggregate level, our decision-making gets so much better. Our ability to help gets so much better. And so that's kind of where MDHs as a whole is really trying to say, okay, Medicaid, you start, but this is where we want to end. And let's talk about strategically how we get there.
Right. Yeah. In my experience, things like whole person care and social determinants of health are things that we've known from a policy perspective and a health outcomes perspective have been important. We've known it for a long time, but it feels like now we're actually taking the steps to be able to create interoperability in that shared language to now be able to actually measure it. So I think that's just a really powerful story and example. Thanks.
Absolutely.
As you were speaking, one of the other things that comes to me is as we create this common language, we then have to enforce those standards. So as we're beginning to think about how to measure data quality and enforce governance, how do you work with those source systems to sort of all get on the same page and address any challenges? Elle, maybe since you spoke last, maybe you have some thoughts there.
Well, one of the things that the Department of Health did was we created a data office and, created a lead for that data office because we wanted to kind of take some decision-making, or not even just decision-making, but kind of funnel governance over data in a more central place so that we can start to break down those silos. And so the data office is responsible for building out that data management strategy, data ownership strategy, being able to catalog our data domains and figure out, how do we create stewards and data owners and put those practices and processes in place? How do we have a consolidated way of requesting changes to data, right? So we have, things like gender. When we want to change what that looks like, how do we make that decision? Because where does it go? All of the systems that use that data now have to be changed. We have to look at that. How does that change our reporting? So those are all of the things that we're trying to figure out how to create those changes in a governed way so that we have a collective decision to move forward. And we know, okay, we've all just decided that we're going to change the way we look at gender. Now what? We decided it. Now we have to all go back to our respective corners and make those changes happen, or come back and say, okay, we know we all agree to it, but these changes can't happen right now because, or here's how we need to do it, and it's going to take longer than we thought. So those are all of the different things that we're trying to consolidate how we manage the way that we talk about data and the way that those conversations around data are facilitated.
Really helpful. Jerry, I'm curious, has Washington set up any of these similar processes? Elle mentioned, for instance, creating a data office. I'm sure Washington is taking similar steps to kind of create some of these standardized processes and data strategies, but I'm curious if you could weigh in.
Yeah, and I was thinking, as both Vicki and Elle were presenting, that Washington and I'm guessing most states all face similar challenges because we deal with the same types of populations, and Washington equally as well. So what also popped into mind is kind of not only the engagement with providers, the engagement with the business, but also kind of our internal resources that we have to bring to bear. So one of the ones that first popped into my mind is enterprise architecture, because you get into those guiding principles and policies and standards related to data, technology, business, in particular in this case, obviously data, and those help guide decision making across kind of the spectrum of the business. But then you also have risk management, because you have issues with, do we have data breaches? Are we effectively protecting our data? You have the data privacy, you have IT security, which is how we achieve that privacy, and then the tools that go along with it. So I was going to also mention that in Washington State, in that coalition that I was talking about, we're in the process of implementing a master person index to kind of support that. Where do these individuals exist? We know that these clients get services from multiple agencies. We know, in fact, that in particularly in the behavioral health space, that they get services in community settings. Sometimes they end up in state psychiatric facilities. They often end up in our correctional systems, but it's the same clients, and we need to ensure that they have continuity of care, that as they leave a setting and enter into another setting, that their care is continued, it's the appropriate care. And so how do we set up systems that support that? And when I say systems, I'm not just talking about technology, I'm also talking about processes to ensure that continuity of care. So the formation of the coalition was one of those things, was to encourage those agencies to work more effectively together. And in fact, this last session, our legislator added our Department of Corrections to our coalition, because recognizing that same population set. But it is that master person index is kind of foundational to where do these individuals exist, and ensuring that we're providing that care. Another solution that we're putting into place is integrated eligibility and enrollment, which is really about the end user experience. But that's also an important part of this equation. So much of what we're doing in Washington State is really kind of how do we tie all these pieces together, whether that's solutions or systems. And from just an internally, how are we doing that? we, the Healthcare Authority, recognized this deficit that we were having in the data space. Kind of to Elle's point, we had siloed data in our agency where different divisions were handling the data themselves. And unfortunately, if you asked 2 divisions or 3 divisions the same question, you would get a different result. And that's not an acceptable situation. So we went down the path of establishing a chief data officer for the agency. And with that, establishing a data strategy, data management practices, data governance. We have committees that look at anytime we do data exchange, anytime we're proposing a data exchange, where data is either leaving or coming into the agency, whether that makes sense from an agency perspective. But our partner agencies are mirroring what we're doing. They're all establishing chief data officers, and our central IT agency for the state is as well. So they just established a chief data officer. They already had a chief privacy officer. So the key agencies are aligning here to ensure that we're doing an effective job of not only protecting the data that we have and that we're entrusted with, but using it in a way that efficiently and effectively supports the business in the business operations and their engagements with either providers or clients, subscribers, whatever the entity might be.
Here you mentioned systems and solutions, but it also strikes me that there's people at the core of all of this. And you mentioned the sort of the formation of the coalition so that you can get everybody working together. But in my experience, getting agencies, even when you share the same goal of improving outcomes for a particular beneficiary, there's always differences in opinions or strategies, particularly around things where security comes into play. I'm curious, have you run into any road bumps along the way? Are there some strategies you could share of how to overcome those? Any best practices we could learn from?
So yes, to your first question about have we run into roadblocks, might help to understand that my former agency that I worked in for many years was our Department of Social and Health Services, which at one point in time had all of our coalition agencies as part of it. It was considered the super agency for Washington State. Our legislature decided over a period of time that probably wasn't the best organizational structure, so they split them apart. But in my former roles, particularly as enterprise architect, I was tasked with trying to get all of our various administrations to work together. So doing this in this coalition fashion is basically deja vu for me. But one of the key things that we did in formation of the coalition is the governance structure that we set up for that. The top tier is the heads of the agencies. So our director and the secretaries of the other agencies, they meet on a regular basis, typically weekly, sometimes multiple times a week, because they're talking about, of course, a whole host of topics. And then there's the operational layer beneath that. So I'm part of that operational layer, as well as my boss, who's kind of over both our Medicaid customer support and our technology services, but similar pairings across the other coalition agencies. So we have that top level kind of strategic, we have that next layer of operational, and then we have a third layer, which is really kind of those who are doing kind of the more detailed work. But that structured approach and that commitment by the executives to work together has been very successful in actually getting the agencies to collaborate. Not saying it's absolutely perfect, because frankly, there's decades of culture there of operating in silos. And so, you kind of have to, when you identify those, basically we figure out, okay, so what's an appropriate way of working with our addressing that silo approach. We've been successful so far. Again, it really helped to have that top tier, that strategic, and right beneath that operational layer, that's the senior executives who support or report directly to that top executive, because you need that operational layer to actually make those strategies happen. We really don't want our top leaders digging down into the bones. That's frankly, they don't have time, and there's a little bit less familiarity. So that tiered structure is absolutely important, and has worked well. Oh, you're muted, Brandon.
Thank you.
Sure.
The other thing that comes to mind is there is a vendor component to this as well. Vicki, I'm thinking back to your or the state's decision to move to implement an integration governance structure. So how do you get not just internal agencies in alignment and beginning to speak the same language and work towards the same goals, but how do you communicate that to your vendor community, and how do you get all of the vendors who are helping you to support these systems also in alignment with your goals?
Brandon, that is such a great question to ask, because looking at our vendor partners are very critical to the governance process. It's not simply just our internal staff, but it's critical to our vendor partners. And what we've done with our vendor partners is treat them like partners. We bring them to the table. We have a collaborative meeting with them, and we communicate. We started communicating to them almost immediately that we were going to hire a solutions integrator who would become the centerpiece of our platform, so that we could make sure that we managed our data and our integration effectively. And so it takes communication, it takes a partnership to bring them together, and have them come in and sit down and really talk to us, to not only hear what we are trying to achieve, but to really discuss the challenges that they face in doing this. What we discovered in that exercise is that they really wanted to reach out to each other, but they thought that they were bound by, contractual obligations. Can we talk to the other vendors? We have proprietary information that we don't want to share, that we want to be careful in sharing the information that we have. But once they realized that the department was fully engaged and participating, and really giving them direction, our culture, our way of really processing data and managing data had changed. And this is a new way that we want to move forward. They were more willing to come and participate. We still have some challenges with some of the vendors, but over time, we anticipate that we will be able to fully knock down those barriers by showing them that we are 100% behind the goals that we are trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's hugely helpful. And yeah, I think ultimately your confidence and direction will not wear off, but allow your vendor partners to really come together. Because I think, I'm not speaking for the vendor community necessarily, but we all want to achieve the same goals, and so we can have that North Star that we're all working towards. It's immensely helpful. Yeah, as you were speaking, it occurred to me that there's lots of different ways that states are kind of working to introduce this system integration component into the Medicaid enterprise. Elle, as we were talking prior to this session, Maryland has pursued sort of a different path than Vicki in Colorado. I'm curious if you could kind of talk to us about the state's decision not to necessarily leverage a particular integration services team, and kind of some of the inputs that went into that decision and some lessons learned along the way.
Yeah, so I think for Maryland, the key theme for us that drove our decision was around ownership. Maryland is a very, as with other states, just because it's the nature of state government and the nature of the V's, where we use contractors for a lot of things. And I think for us, Maryland really wanted to look at what did Maryland want responsibility over and what didn't we? What were the things that we wanted to own, and what we believed we could give away, and give away. But it for us, it was about, trying to draw a line in the sand about what we wanted the Maryland team to be responsible of. And we felt that from an integration perspective, we wanted to be on the management side of the integrations and our partnerships and relationships with those systems and vendors that we're integrating with. We did not want to hand that over to a vendor. And that also speaks to kind of Maryland solving another one of our problems in terms of data ownership, because we've got all of these different vendor provided systems. And so when we are transitioning, there are, potentially challenges with getting the data where we want it, when we want it, how we want it. And so it was a push for us to try to figure out how to bring ownership back to the state for certain things, particularly our vendor relationships and our data. And that was kind of one of our first steps in doing that. So we chose not to use an integration services provider because we wanted to have that, that service portion. We wanted to own that. We did leverage MuleSoft as the integration platform, the technology tool, to do the integrations, but we wanted to be the ones to actually manage being the connective tissue around that platform. Obviously, there'll definitely be some, contract resources from a technology perspective, from a day-to-day operations perspective, but we wanted to make sure that we had Maryland's, state employees kind of running and owning the vendor relationships and that, and owning the integration control.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And I think one of the things that we've talked a lot about is some of the technology and how technology can ultimately empower some of the departmental ends that we want to achieve. I think it's been key in my experience that technology is really, it's a means to an end, but it can't be thought of as the end itself. And so I want to get back to the conversation that we touched on a little bit before around this concept of whole person care and how bringing all of these different data sets can really change the way we're thinking about business outcomes and the use cases we can achieve. Jerry, I know this is of particular importance to you, so I'm curious if you could share, some use cases that you've been working towards.
Sure. Well, and I would start with use cases we were working our way from. So kind of going back to that siloed approach when I came on board, each of our divisions was managing their data separately, and we actually brought agency executives from all the divisions together to actually discuss the data issue and the challenges of the data issue. And it's not that they hadn't done it before, but our deputy basically said, we're not going to say no to the recommendation this time, which the recommendation had always been consolidate. And they're like, yeah, that makes sense. And then it never happened. So that's where we got into what I mentioned before, which is the creation of our chief data officer, because it was belief if we bring in a chief data officer to manage this process for the agency, that we could get past those silos. So it's not that the people who were working in those divisions, who were the analysts supporting those divisions, weren't still doing that, but structurally they were aligned underneath that chief data officer so that we got some standardization of practice, and that we could introduce more formalized data governance, the more standardized data management processes, et cetera. So that was kind of our foundational point. And since then, we have developed a data strategy. We have a data governance steering committee. We have structures in place to ensure that we are addressing data needs, data use in a common way across the agency. So that includes establishment of policy and practice. But so moving away from, obviously, what we wanted to move away from was those silos and move to a common way of doing business. But another goal or use case was we know we have Medicaid data, and even our commercial insurance business has value, and we want to manage our data in that way. It's not that we're selling that data, certainly not. Can't do that, but more of manage that data in a way that this data has value, and we want to be very thoughtful about how we're sharing it, who we're sharing it with, and the mechanisms related to that. So the structures we've been putting into place are being put into place to achieve that outcome of recognizing the value of the data and putting processes in place that ensure that we're maximizing the use of it, but at the same time, obviously, effectively protecting it, ensuring the privacy, et cetera, that goes along with the nature of the data that we hold on behalf of our clients, and that we share with our providers. So,
excellent. Thank you so much. And that's a good segue, because that aligned with some of the comments that I'm seeing from the community. And so just a reminder, attendees, please feel free to drop some questions in. And maybe for the next few minutes, just wanted to turn to some of those that we're getting. So one for the group: how do states anticipate artificial intelligence and machine learning can be effectively leveraged as part of the enterprise data management strategy? Anybody have a thought?
I can go on that. First of all, I would say that the current generative API is a concern. And so that's my caveat to start with this, because the appropriate structures aren't in place yet to ensure that we don't compromise our data. So we as an agency, we as a state actually are discussing how we're going to address the whole generative API thing. Stepping back from that, you have the whole concept of how do we integrate bots into our process, RPA, so one of the things that we are doing in that space is our central IT shop is in essence standing up a service. It's contracted, but a service for bots, so that if agencies want to utilize that service, we have a common platform that agencies are using for that purpose. So different needs, whether it's employment security, whether that's social services, whether that's healthcare, different needs, same platform. So that's one of the approaches that Washington State is taking. I will say that probably one of the challenges you'll recognize is each state's approach, each state's legislature kind of has a different take on things. So I will tell you that in Washington State, for the last several years, we've had this legislation related to the term was automated decision making, and it was really around concerns around privacy and bias in our systems. And Washington takes that very seriously to the extent that they were defining automated decision making in a way that pretty much said any IT system was part of automated decision making, and we were going to put all these strictures around that, and it's like it didn't pass. But there was, I think, basically a lack of understanding, with, in particular, one legislator with regards to the intent of IT systems and how we can appropriately address bias and privacy in our laws and in our systems. And so each state has their kind of their own variation of that, different legislators, et cetera. But for Washington State, there's let's say a heightened concern in that space. So we've taken a more conservative approach to the whole bots and AI machine learning, just because of that concern about it doesn't have a heavy involvement, or maybe a less heavy involvement than they want in the process. I would say I'm the first one to say we should never have a process that's fully automated that doesn't have a human involved somewhere within that process. But to say anyway, it's an interesting space. But for Washington, we're just walking kind of tentative or a light step on that rope to make sure that we're aligning with our own legislators' intent, and obviously our residents' intent with regards to the privacy of their data, and certainly bias within the systems that provide services to the citizens of the state. Stop
Thanks,
there.
Yeah. And we're coming up on the top of the hour. So thanks everybody for just a really interesting conversation. It's a topic that we could devote a whole day to if we had the time. Before we go, I did want to make sure that I gave each of the participants and just a chance to leave something with the audience. Like if there is one thing from your experience and the discussion we've had that, we would want the audience to walk away from, what would it be? And so maybe I can go around, and I'll start with you, Elle.
So for us, it was the importance of executive sponsorship, right? Executive buy-in, because a lot of the things that we are trying to accomplish needs our leadership to really push and be behind, especially when you're talking about getting multiple agencies on the same page, getting us to break down silos and all these walls. It can't happen by just, hopes and prayers, by us just talking to each other. We've got to have executive buy-in, things like setting up data offices. Leadership's got to be behind that, right? To create the positions, to give it funding, all those different things. So, you start there. You start at the top. That was what that was our main takeaway, because we tried at first to start talking to the business units and doing all these things, and then it just stopped. Like, okay, what do we do now? But it was really getting that executive buy-in to push, to meet us in the middle, to allow us to propel forward. So talk to your leadership.
Vicki, what about you? Something you want to leave the audience with?
Yes, Brandon, I would agree with Elle in what she just said, but I would also say have a solid data governance structure to support data and integration across all systems, not just a few, but across all systems.
Fantastic. Jerry, I'll leave you with the last word.
Sure, and mine's going to sound simplistic, but plan and stick to the plan. Plan up front. But I also highly agree with Elle and Vicki on that. You don't have executive buy-in, you're starting in a deficit.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again to the participants. Thank you on behalf of myself and my company, Innovacer. We hope you've enjoyed the webinar and discussion, and we look forward to seeing you at sessions across the day. Thank you again, and back to you, Rob.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Vicki, Jerry, and Al. Tremendous to bring together these very well thought out sort of conversation points, and obviously some threads here in the chat room that we'll be exploring throughout the day as well in follow-up sessions. But yeah, thank you very much to today's panelists. We are literally on the hour, so I'll just give everyone a heads up. One, that for state folks that are on the call, this session will be recorded and will be available in the archive, which is all contained at the, through your membership sign-in at State HIT Connect at the community website. So if you have colleagues who thought, look, I have team members that really should be brought up to speed on some of these key discussion points, then, just email us. We'll get them signed up as members, which is all complimentary, and they can have access to this as well as other archives. The next session for the day upcoming will be our collaborative learning roundtable, 2:30 to 3:30 EDT. That is the impact of Medicaid on behavioral health conditions. That's for state or non-vendor community members only. And we have Indiana, Maine, and Bamboo Health will be presenting there. And then, of course, we have our 3 to 4:30 session later on today, which will touch upon some of the AI conversation. And you'll be learning there from Arizona, who have done implementation of sort of, AI and virtual sort of chatbots, and are exploring future potentials along that same conversation thread. So definitely tune into that if that's an area you're interested in exploring as well. Other than that, thank you very much. And I'll give you back, obviously, a break before the next session. Thanks for your participation. Do email us with your comments and, ideas about how we can continue some of these, the discussion topics introduced by our group here. Thank you.